Welcome back to CBS News 24/7. I'm Reed Cowan. President Joe Biden defending his decision today to pardon his son, Hunter Biden, facing sentencing for federal gun charges and tax evasion. The president granted his son a full and unconditional pardon that covers any crimes committed or may have been committed between 2014 and 2024. The president saying in part, no reasonable person who looks at the facts of Hunter's cases can reach any other conclusion than Hunter was singled out only because he is my son, and that is wrong, close quote. Just moments ago, and we wanted to show you this, First Lady Jill Biden was asked a question when unveiling some of the White House Christmas display. She was asked about this pardon. She steps to the mic. You cannot hear her say this, but let's roll it and let you see that moment. You can just make out her answer here. Listen. He says, of course, I support the pardon of my son, close quote. Hunter Biden weighed in with a statement saying, I will never take the clemency I have been given today for granted and will devote the life I have rebuilt to helping those who are still sick and suffering. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre expanding on that earlier today, talking with reporters aboard Air Force One.
One of the things that the president always believes is to be truthful to the American people. That is something that he always truly believes. And if you see the end of his, I assume that you've read his statement, and you look at the end of that statement, and he actually says that in the first line in the last paragraph, and respects the thinking and how the American people will actually see this in his decision making. And I would encourage everyone to read in full the president's statement. I think he lays out his thought process. He lays out how he came to this decision. He came to this decision this weekend, so let's be very clear about that. He says it himself, it's in his voice. He said he came to this decision this weekend. And he said he wrestled with this. And because he believes in the justice system, but he also believes that the war politics infected the process and led to a miscarriage of justice.
The voice of Karine Jean-Pierre aboard Air Force One on its way to Angola. CBS News White House reporter Willie James Inman is live there in Angola, where President Biden just touched down. Willie, Biden said that he would respect the process, that he would not pardon his son. But now, over the weekend, that changed. What changed?
Hey there, Reed. Good to be with you. Well, President Biden hasn't spoken to the traveling press corps who is traveling here with him to Angola. He's greeting members of the U.S. Embassy here in the country on the tarmac there in Luanda, not too far away from where I am now. And really, Karine Jean-Pierre didn't offer anything necessarily new. She said that the president wrestled with the decision over the weekend, but she was pressed multiple times by reporters aboard Air Force One as to why the president had this change of heart. Now, the president did outline in his statement that he believed that the prosecution of his son, Hunter Biden, was somehow politically motivated. But at the same time, he said that Americans should essentially trust the justice system. And reporters aboard Air Force One pressed Karine Jean-Pierre about that notion that you can't have it both ways. But nonetheless, the White House is, of course, putting out or adding to this statement that the president said last night, released last night, saying that the president came to this decision over the weekend. I'll note that time and time again, we have asked the White House whether or not the president would change his mind on this pardoning of his son. They stood by the president's earlier statements on this situation, where he said earlier this year, this summer in fact, that he would not pardon his son Hunter Biden. But it's been an about-face and a major change and shift that is being criticized by not only Republicans, but some Democrats as well, Reed.
Criticized by Republicans and Democrats, but are you getting any sense of any feeling of shock within Mr. Biden's own administration? Any reaction from anybody on the inside there?
Yeah, for the most part, the White House has been pretty quiet about this news coming late last night. Now, we did, as you mentioned, and played there, we saw the First Lady come out in support this pardon that the president talked about with Hunter Biden being pardoned. The president himself, he'd had multiple opportunities to speak to members of the press. He didn't do so. He didn't do so last night when he left Washington, D.C. He didn't do so earlier today, and we haven't heard from him today, although we, of course, see him with our cameras there at the airport in Luanda. He will have an opportunity to perhaps explain his decision-making process via speaking to us rather than a paper statement. He has a couple of open press events here in Angola where he's set to talk about the U.S.-Angola partnership and strengthening that partnership, as well as further supporting Africa with key initiatives that are led by the Americans. But the White House really is quiet in terms of their response here. They oftentimes said time and time again that the president would not do this, but in explaining what the president did, there really isn't much of an explanation beyond the president's statement that he released last night.
Willie James Inman, thank you so much. We know that there will be much more reporting, not only regarding the Hunter Biden issue, but what comes of those talks there in Africa. Nice to have you with us on the stream. So let's bring in CBS News politics reporter and attorney Katrina Kaufman from West Palm Beach. Katrina, what has President-elect Donald Trump had to say about this?
Well, President Trump responded pretty quickly last night on Truth Social, and he called this an abuse and miscarriage of justice read. He also asked if it was going to include the January 6th defendants that Trump has talked about pardoning. But just to add a few things about the pardon, I think there are a few things that are really notable here. One is that Biden actually has a very low pardon rate for a president. It's something that he's been criticized about by some experts. This is also the first time that a president has pardoned their child, and what's unique about it is it's unusually broad read. Normally these are for specific offenses, but Biden's pardon of his son covers a decade and any federal crimes, and it seems very clear that it stems from this concern that Trump is entering office, and not just that, but he is putting his own personal attorneys into the Justice Department, which left Hunter very vulnerable.
And we also know that more pardons could be announced soon. There's been some talk that the outgoing president could also preemptively pardon other people who might be the focus and the target of a new Trump administration in the Justice Department there. Are you hearing anything about that?
I mean, we did hear the press secretary today for Biden say that we should expect more clemencies to come. She wouldn't say anything about a timeline, but I think you're absolutely right. It is possible maybe we will see him pardon special counsel Jack Smith. But these experts also say that they would like to see him bestow these pardons on, just normal people as well who are in jail and who deserve them. So not just, his son and these notable figures.
Right. Okay, so President Joe Biden, not the only one facing backlash today. The president-elect Donald Trump announcing a handful of new intended nominees for his administration. The one getting the headlines, of course, Mr. Patel for the FBI. What can you tell us about him? Who is he? And what kind of an uphill fight do you think he'll have in the Senate?
So, Reed, there is a lot of backlash to this nomination, and Kash Patel is very controversial. For one, there are questions about his qualifications to run the FBI, but especially about what he has said he would do to the FBI. He has said he wants to fire the top ranks, that he wants to shut down the FBI building in Washington and turn it into a museum, that he wants to seek out people that he views as having wronged President-elect Donald Trump. And this is really supposed to be a nonpartisan, non-political position. It's also currently filled by someone that Trump chose during his first administration, Christopher Wray. So Wray has 3 years left on his term, and he will now either have to resign or be fired by Donald Trump for Kash Patel to step in if he can really make it through this confirmation process, because there are going to be a lot of questions for him.
A lot of questions where his name is concerned, but another name in the hot seat as we start yet another week, and that is, of course, Pete Hegseth, Defense Secretary nominee. A bombshell report that's getting a lot of headlines today first appeared in the New Yorker, revealed about a lot of details about Hegseth's job history. What are we finding out there?
So, Reed, the New Yorker got a hold of a whistleblower report, and on top of sexual assault allegations that we've already heard about from 2017, this report reveals that Hegseth was forced to step down, supposedly, from 2 nonprofit advocacy organizations that he led, and it was for a number of reasons. There were serious allegations of financial mismanagement, sexual misconduct, and personal misconduct. In this report, it says that there were events that Hegseth was working at, and he was so intoxicated that he had to be carried out. There was also some notable reporting that came out from the New York Times last week that's worth mentioning, which is they got a hold of an email that Hegseth's own mother had sent him, where she talks about his mistreatment of women. Now, when the Times reached out to her, she said that she had immediately apologized to her son, that she was angry at the time. This took place when he was divorcing his second wife, but there's just a lot of allegations swirling against Hegseth, and this new report is significant, as well as an email from his own mother.
Katrina Kaufman, CBS News politics reporter, thank you so much to talk about as we start our week, and that will fuel many conversations throughout the week. Thank you so much. Well, it's Cyber Monday, but places in New York State calling it Snow Monday. We'll go live to the Buffalo area. Let it snow, everybody. To the Middle East now. After a ceasefire went into effect between Israel and Hezbollah last week, both sides now accuse the other of breaching the truce. Today, Israel says Hezbollah fired 2 projectiles into a disputed border zone held by Israel and Lebanon. CBS News senior foreign correspondent Deborah Pata reports the attack comes as Israel faces accusations that it violated the truce more than 50 times in recent days.
The fragile ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah on the northern border with Lebanon is being tested. It came into effect less than a week ago, and both sides are accusing the other of violations. The Lebanese Health Ministry says at least 2 people have been killed in Israeli strikes in southern Lebanon. According to Israeli media, both the U.S. and France have warned Israel to uphold the agreement. It's understood the U.S. is concerned about Israeli drones flying over Beirut, and the French have accused Israel of more than 50 ceasefire violations. Israel has rejected the accusations, saying it is enforcing the truce and that it is Hezbollah that has violated it. And then just this afternoon, Hezbollah fired 2 missiles at Israel, calling it a defensive strike after numerous violations. No casualties have been reported. The simmering tension on the border and the back-and-forth accusations underscore just how tenuous this 60-day ceasefire is. Back to you.
Deborah Pata, thank you for that. And a major update on the conflict in Gaza. Israel just confirmed an American-Israeli hostage from Long Island is dead in Gaza. The IDF says Omar Nutra died fighting Hamas militants during the October 7th attack. Israel says 97 hostages remain in captivity at this hour. Let's stay in the Middle East right now. Video out of Syria shows the aftermath of deadly air raids in the city of Aleppo. So here's the backstory here. On Saturday, Syrian rebels swept through Aleppo in a surprise attack. They were challenging Syrian President Bashar Assad. In response, Russia now joining the Syrian government by launching attacks on the areas seized by the Islamist-led rebels there. Well, the civil war in Syria began more than a decade ago. In fact, look at this map here. Government forces control the west and the south of the country. American-backed rebels dominate the northeast. And Islamist rebel factions, including the ones now in control of Aleppo, they are the ones who hold most of the northwest. People in Aleppo now getting out slowly to survey the damage to their neighborhoods. The Syrian army says the Islamist-led rebels killed dozens of their soldiers. Today's response comes as Syria's allies, Russia and Iran, vow to continue supporting the Syrian government. To West Africa now, in a tragedy. During a soccer stampede, you can see the melee there. 56 dead after fans clashed in Guinea's second largest city. Children are among the victims. Fans grew unruly during the final of a tournament because of refereeing. In fact, it got so bad at one point security used tear gas as fans stormed the pitch. A A political coalition called for an investigation, believing the tournament was organized to gather support for their military leader. Coming back to the United States in the Great Lakes region where thousands start the day, and you can see why here with snow shovels. They have those in hand and shovels bolted to some big rigs out there. CBS News meteorologist Rob Marciano braving the snow for us. Rob, you are in a very slushy place called Cassadaga, New York, just south of Buffalo. Welcome. We hope you're keeping warm there. Lots of snow to talk about where you are.
Yeah, Reed, I tell you, snow has thankfully taken a break for a few hours this morning at least, but it's already snowed well over 50 inches here in this spot. And you don't see a whole lot of white behind me because this is kind of a unique situation in that we're at a farm and you hear the cows, you see the cows behind me. Unfortunately, the barn which these cows were in, the roof, as you can see, collapsed at some point last night or early this morning. The farmers came out and they saw the collapse and they hustled in to get what the cattle out. Unfortunately, not all of them survived. So there's been a cavalcade of volunteers, of neighbors, the fire department here to try to shore up the situation, clear out this area to get these cows to where they can have some shelter now. So because it's cold and it's snowing and it's not a good situation for them, and obviously for the folks that own this farm, they're a bit distraught for sure. So that's the situation here in this particular spot in Cassadaga, which, as you mentioned, about an hour south of Buffalo, nearly 50 inches of snow falling. There's a second barn that they have that they've been scrambling to scrape the snow off that. So we're in a situation now where if you've got over 2 or 3 feet of snow on your roof, even if it's a fabric roof like this one was, you got to get that weight off. So this early in the season, it's a lot of snow so far. Reed?
All right, I think you just opened up a market. Coats for cows. Rob Marciano, our thoughts with the farmers who lost that roof there. Excellent reporting there from Cassadaga, New York. All right, Jess, so let's bring you in and let's talk about some of the science there. Yeah, that lake effect snow, and it just collapsed the roof.
Yeah, you know, and they're doing that widespread throughout that whole region this week. We're going to get a little bit of a break on Tuesday, but more to come from Wednesday heading into this weekend. So let's start up over there. Let's dive into this on our virtual reality map. On a day like today, where we continue to see more of that snow fall in communities that have already dealt with such strong impacts like you just saw out there. Over 50 inches in Cassadaga. We've seen close to around 60 inches in certain communities, and it's all from the same area of low pressure that brought in heavy amounts of snow throughout our Thanksgiving weekend, and we're seeing more of it as it's locked into this region heading into this week. Now, a lake effect snow advisory has been issued, or snow warning has been issued, anywhere from Ohio stretched over into northern Pennsylvania and western parts of New York. We also have winter storm warnings and winter weather advisories widespread throughout all those coastal areas along the Great Lakes closer to Michigan. So take a look behind me. Here's what we're going to be dealing with heading into this week's forecast. Our friends off into the West Coast dealing with nice, dry and warm weather actually. However, all the way up into the Northeast we go as we zoom into this area of low pressure that's continuing to bring in more moisture throughout this region where it's already cold. This is going to stay locked in for us. This chilly and cold, dense air is widespread from Indiana all the way up into Maine. But where we keep a very close eye on, of course, are the areas that get impacted by the lake effect snow. Copenhagen, close to around 60 inches so far, just up in New York, Cassadaga, where that live report was from, already at around 50 inches. And we're continuing to add to that as we head into this week. That area of low pressure delivers it moving in from the north. We could receive an additional 20 inches of snow through Tuesday, and then we'll see more on the back end of this week too, heading into Thursday, Friday, and lasting into this weekend. It's been pretty impressive so far, and keep in mind, this is just the first major system sweeping throughout there this season. There's a lot more to come, so this is the time to prepare.
Mother Nature's mean.
It is not fun.
Thank you so much, Jess. When we come back on CBS News 24/7, we're going to be talking about a court case getting started right now. A wedding, a deadly DUI crash, and the lawsuits fly. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. A live look inside a Charleston, South Carolina courtroom. A trial begins for the woman accused of killing a bride on her wedding night. A tragic story. Prosecutors say Jamie Lee Komorowski crashed her car while driving under the influence. She reportedly hit a golf cart carrying 34-year-old Samantha Miller while leaving her reception. The crash also seriously injured her new husband. CBS News correspondent Skylar Henry live outside the courthouse. Skylar, you and your team are watching this one closely. This is the day that really we start to see some strategy here. But if I'm understanding it correctly, my friend, and help me here, She has not entered a plea. Once she does so, that could either trigger jury selection or what?
I got it now. Thank you.
Or we could see what would ultimately happen following a judge's decision. Reed, good to see you as always. If she were to plead guilty, then we would hear impact statements from both sides, and then we'll see ultimately what would happen moving forward as it relates to a judge's decision, as it relates to sentencing. But if she were to say she was not guilty in this instance, then of course the jury selection would proceed, and then we'll see what happens following that. But as you pointed out, proceedings just getting underway inside of the courtroom. In fact, Komorowski was actually approached the bench, and her legal team notified her whether she was fully aware of the charges against her, several of them very serious charges, including reckless homicide following that April 2023 crash that killed Samantha Miller and seriously injured Eric Hutchinson, along with two of their relatives. And so we'll see what happens. We should figure out pretty quickly what the judge decides or what will happen moving forward. So we'll see maybe in the next 20 to 30 minutes or so. This was supposed to begin about an hour ago, but as these things usually go, you know, they take some time. So we'll see what happens moving forward.
And we just want to remind our viewers, when we see it, you see it. So Skylar will be able to jump on if there is that news-making item that happens in the courtroom. But I do want to ask you, while we still have you, Skylar, according to a wrongful death lawsuit filed by the bride's husband, some businesses are going to have to pay up big time. How does that work?
Yeah, so several of the businesses allegedly that Komorowski had either visited or had been using during the time of the crash have now been ordered to pay over more than $800,000. That's a series of bars and restaurants who say that she was significantly overserved. That is the rental car facility that she was using, in this case Enterprise Rental Car, that she was using to drive the Toyota sedan. And I believe we're getting some more updates as it relates from inside of the courtroom. She just pleaded guilty, so a significant development there, Reed, just in the last 30 seconds or so, in that Jamie Lee Komorowski just pleaded guilty there. So in this case, we'll see, as I was pointing out before, what will happen in terms of what the judge decides to do. We know that we will still hear those impact statements from both sides. The defense is also expected to speak following today's court proceedings as well, so we'll see what they have to say. Obviously a tragic story all around, taking into consideration this was Samantha and Eric's wedding night. They were supposed to be celebrating a night that they had been planning for so long. And of course, this night led to so much tragedy, not too far from where we are here in Charleston, South Carolina. And so new developments, Jamie Lee Komorowski pleading guilty here. We'll see what the judge has to say and how we decide to move forward. But to your point, several of those businesses ordered to pay more than $800,000 in significant damages there. And that was according to an exchange for the release of liability or any claims of wrongful death or personal injury in that incident. They're also required to pay some 33.33% of attorney fees as well. And there are still some outstanding things there that could essentially lead to more money going to the estate, if you will, of Samantha Miller, in this case, her new husband, Eric Hutchinson. So we'll see what happens there as well.
And Skylar, we're looking at live pictures inside the courtroom right now, standing before the judge after that breaking news item that we brought you here on CBS News 24/7, pleading guilty. Correct me if I'm wrong as to procedure here. Victim impact statements, and then what? The judge can go directly to sentencing?
Yes. So that's what we could see moving forward. It's still unclear whether that could be something that happens in the next couple of minutes, hours, or if the judge decides to take their time and decide something later on down the line. Obviously, all of this happening very quickly, as you pointed out, in real time. So we'll see once we hear from those statements what the judge decides to do. This is something that could be decided within the next couple of hours. Remember, Komorowski is facing anywhere between 3 and more than 80 years in prison. So we'll see how the judge decides to move forward. This was a story, an incident that shocked the nation, really, in terms of the tragedy and the scale of it all. And just the fact, that, this is a story that we hear all the time, and why so many people say simply not to drink and drive. And so we will see how the judge decides to move forward and whether we will get some sort of sentencing in the next few minutes.
Well, and we've also been showing that video of her taking a kiss from her new husband on her wedding day, and it just reminds us, on days like this, in courtrooms across the United States, when somebody takes accountability, pleads guilty, the story then becomes about the victim. And we are now looking at the pictures of this beautiful bride and her husband on a day that started beautifully, and because of the person on your screen now who has just pled guilty, turned to absolute tragedy. Skylar, thank you so much for being there on the air for us when breaking news happened there in that case. Let's jump the map to California, where lawmakers meet in a special session. They say they're digging in their heels. They're ready for a fight against President-elect Donald Trump. Those lawmakers meeting to really strategize legal protections of California's progressive policies ahead of another Trump presidency. And in order to do that, Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom is asking the majority female legislature for additional money or funding to pay for those anticipated legal fights with the feds. Newsom wants that money in place, in pockets, and ready to go before Trump's inauguration day on January 20th. During Trump's first term, California sued his administration more than 120 times. It cost roughly $42 million in litigation costs. Legislators are expected to spend the year discussing ways to protect a number of laws. We're talking about the ones that made that state a sanctuary for people seeking abortions. Eyes on that and what happens in Sacramento coming up throughout the day. Well, today, the U.S. Supreme Court will weigh in on the candy and fruit-flavored vaping products banned by the FDA. Their logic, those products appeal to kids and contribute to a spike in young people vaping. Vape companies fought back. A lower court decided the FDA failed to follow proper legal procedures in doing this. Well, the FDA kicked it back again, appealed the decision, so now it goes to the Supreme Court. Today, they will hear opening arguments in that case. Cyber Monday, we're watching your money. When we come back, how is your wallet and what's the damage? Are you feeling it yet? Got a fascinating bit of information when we come back on CBS News 24/7. When specifically, on the clock, the frenzy will reach a pitch. We'll be right back. Looking live at Capitol Hill right now, coming into our video monitors, where lawmakers deal with the fallout of President Biden's decision to pardon his son Hunter for gun charges and tax evasion. CBS News Congressional correspondent Nicole Killian joins us now from Capitol Hill with the latest. What's the reaction there from where you stand, and how has President Biden's move played out among those lawmakers?
Well, it certainly has been mixed read. We have heard both from Democrats and Republicans who have been somewhat critical of this decision. Republicans, as you can imagine, certainly disagree with the president's move and feel that this was an abuse of power on his part and something that merits a reform going forward. But interestingly, there are some Democrats who are also echoing similar language in terms of calling for a reform, most notably Dean Phillips of Minnesota, even though he is an outgoing member of Congress, but he is certainly one that has called for reform. And we just heard a short time ago from Vermont Senator Peter Welch, who called President Biden's move unwise.
So Congress is also responding to Trump's latest pick to his administration, Kash Patel. Trump tapped Patel to serve as the FBI director. Walk us through the controversy there, Nicole.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, this is somebody who is kind of considered a loyalist of President-elect Donald Trump, someone who had worked in the first Trump administration, is a close ally of the president-elect, and we know with all of his selections, he has picked people who have been extremely loyal to him and those that he trusts, who have been kind of part of his inner circle. Kash Patel was certainly one who was on the campaign trail with the president-elect many times and has been a staunch defender of the president-elect. But that being said, there are some concerns about his level of experience and kind of some of the more controversial positions he has taken about the role of government and the FBI in particular. Also worth noting that there necessarily isn't a vacancy right now for FBI director. That is currently filled by Christopher Wray, and usually FBI directors serve a 10-year term, so unless the president-elect fires him or Wray steps down, there really isn't any opening. That being said, there are some lawmakers who are speculating that perhaps it is possible that the president-elect could move forward with trying to terminate Christopher Wray, thereby trying to get Kash Patel into that role. But kind of until that happens, it's a moot appointment.
Patel, very loyal to Donald Trump, and it looks like job description number one in a lot of these appointments is loyalty. Let's talk about another Trump loyalist, Attorney General pick Pam Bondi of Florida. Also on Capitol Hill, we understand, to meet with Senator Chuck Grassley. What are you watching for there?
Well, this will be her first time here on Capitol Hill. Interestingly, she was supposed to meet with Senator Grassley earlier today, but his flight got delayed, so they're just like us, Reed. But that being said, we are expecting that meeting to happen this afternoon, and Pam Bondi is expected to meet with other lawmakers as well while she is up here. But look, she is a notable, different selection, kind of a contrast compared to Matt Gaetz, who ultimately had to withdraw from his nomination, of course, referring to the former Florida congressman. But in terms, and that's something I think that's worth pointing out, because quite frankly, when Matt Gaetz was up here on Capitol Hill meeting with senators, it was all behind closed doors. They did it in one of those hideaway offices at the Capitol where really cameras are restricted. Pam Bondi this time around meeting with Chuck Grassley, who will be the incoming Senate Judiciary Chairman and really tasked with her confirmation hearing. She's going to his office. She's making the rounds, which is typically what we normally see with nominees. So that also kind of gives you a little bit of a behind-the-scenes insight into, how her nomination is being handled relative to Matt Gaetz, but certainly a sign that the Trump transition feels confident in her ultimate ability to get confirmed, and so that is why she is making those courtesy visits here on Capitol Hill this week.
Well, we also saw Pete Hegseth in recent days before Thanksgiving doing the very same thing. What are you hearing as we go into a new week relative to Pete Hegseth and some recent reporting that I'm sure his team would really love to see go away?
Yeah, I mean, that's something we'll definitely be on the lookout for this week. Obviously, as senators and members of the House will be coming back from their Thanksgiving Day recess. But look, before the recess, obviously there were a number of Republican senators who continued to stand by Pete Hegseth despite that police report that surfaced back in 2017 from an alleged sexual assault allegation stemming from an encounter with a woman at a hotel back in Monterey, California. Again, I asked Hegseth directly about that accusation. He said that he was cleared of any wrongdoing. And again, many lawmakers pointed out to me that they feel that because he wasn't charged, they're kind of taking his word. Now that these new allegations have surfaced about more potential sexual misconduct, financial impropriety, and the like, certainly we'll be watching for reaction from lawmakers as to whether they continue to stand by him going forward.
No shortage in the headlines, and we're only at Monday. Nicole Killian, always an honor to talk to you. Thank you so much for your excellence. Well, our monitors take us to the State Department, where spokesperson Matthew Miller talked about the United States' reaction to the escalation in Syria after Islamist-led rebels took over the city of Aleppo over the weekend. Let's listen into that.
In the immediate term, what we want to see are de-escalation and protection of civilians and minority groups. But our overall policy remains the same, is that we want to see a serious and credible political process to end this civil war once and for all, with a political settlement consistent with United Nations Security Council Resolution 2254. As you know, Sean, that resolution calls for a process facilitated by the United Nations, where the Syrian regime and the opposition groups would negotiate a path forward for Syria. It's important that that path be Syrian-led and that have a process that ultimately leads towards elections. That's what we want to see over the long term, but in the short term, we want to see a de-escalation of the situation and protection of civilians.
And what policy levers does the U.S. have?
All right, you've been listening into the State Department there. De-escalation protection of citizens. Will be watching to see if, as Russia now gets involved with Syria a little bit, if that can play out in the favor of the United States. Okay, we see you out there. We see you clicking those keyboards for those Cyber Monday deals. It is Cyber Monday. Chances are you're a part of that $13 billion expected spend by day's end. That projection is up 6.1% from last year. And get this, 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. tonight, where you are sitting, is when we understand spending will be at its peak. CBS News Money Watch correspondent Kelly O'Grady is joining me live once again. Okay, I did the math. That is $15.7 million every minute. It makes you think that perhaps some people might be motivated to pull the plug and say, okay, enough, 8 to 10 p.m.
I think my husband might. Maybe he's watching. He probably should. And you take that one step further, Reed. I was thinking, what does that mean per second? That's $260,000 being spent per second, which is just wild, right? I mean, everyone's buying their electronics, their apparel, and we've talked about this before. I mean, people are really deal focused right now. They want to make sure they get the best value because things are tight, and everyone knows that this period is when retailers offer the best discounts. You're kind of seeing roughly about 30% on average across all the items out there, and retailers have said, this is the time. We are not going to continue offering those throughout the holiday season, so you're seeing people sort of front load that spending right now. The other thing, Reed, that I'm a little bit concerned about is how people are paying for this, right? We've seen credit card debt higher than it has ever been before. And this research firm, Morning Consult, they said 20% of people are willing to go into debt for the holidays. So if that's how many people are willing to go into debt, the reality is probably a bit higher than that when the bill comes in January.
Do you think there's any correlation, Kelly, between the fact that people are willing to get out the credit card to use the plastic to swipe it and an overall sense of positivity, people thinking things are going to be better in the new year?
Absolutely. I mean, we've seen the consumer confidence ratings increase. People are thinking, potentially new administration, better economy. And I think going into the holiday season, you always have that excitement. I mean, there's always the anxiety of,
Right.
Okay, I have to spend a lot on those that I love. But yeah, there is a general optimism around this time of year that tends to go away when the beginning of the year comes and you have to pay for everything.
Yeah, I was raised in mall culture in the 1980s, the ratted hair and all of that. But I went into the mall near my house. It's crickets. It's the place where people go to walk or where kids go to play in those bouncy houses at daycare. It's a sea change, is it not? And how do we feel about brick and mortar stores in this new culture of just click and ship?
It absolutely is, Reed. I love to go to the mall. I was raised in mall culture too. That was
Right.
the hangout with your friends. Spencer's Gifts, all of those throwback stores. But yes, there is a sea change, and it was accelerated by the pandemic when we were all sitting at home and we clicked and things arrived a couple days later. And so the brick and mortar stores that haven't evolved with the times are really struggling. I mean, you've seen Walmart, for example, really have to ramp up their e-commerce department, and they're really only just starting to break even there. So yeah, if you're a brick and mortar store that hasn't made that transition, we are seeing less people, go back to the stores than I think originally hoped.
Kelly O'Grady, in our minds, I'll meet you at Spencer's Gift, you meet me at Hot Topics, and then perhaps we'll go over to Orange Julius and talk about our favorite Swatch watches. You know what I'm talking about. Kelly O'Grady, thank you so much. Oh, Mrs. Fields cookies, remember that? When we come back, we're going to be talking not only about coffee cups and cookies, but also the plastic in those cups. A CBS investigation. Do they all get recycled for real? We're going to look at that story when we come back. Welcome back, everybody. Okay, so when you throw Starbucks plastic cups into recycling bins, you probably think it'll be turned into something completely new, right? Well, our CBS News team investigated to see where exactly those cups ended up after throwing nearly 60 of them, those cold beverage cups, into the bins. They were embedded with trackers that really helped us to dig down into this, marked recycle. But here's what they found. Only 36 cups pinged to final locations. Here's the breakdown. 14 went to landfills, 13 went to waste transfer stations that, by the way, don't recycle plastic, and then 5 went to incinerators, 4 of them to materials recovery facilities. Let's bring in CBS News national environmental correspondent David Schechter. David, you investigated this. You visited the Starbucks Innovation Lab in Seattle. Starbucks says that those plastic cups are recyclable. That's true, but what's the deeper issue here, my friend?
Yeah, so the cups are recyclable. They make, 75% of their business is in cold cups for those drinks. Those pieces of plastic are recyclable. But the issue is there aren't very many companies really that will recycle it. We found that about 1% of this type of plastic that's in the cup, it's called polypropylene number 5, PPP5, it can only be recycled basically in one place or a few other spots around the country. They can only handle 1 to 2% of all the cups in the country, not just Starbucks cups. So there's this just huge avalanche of plastic cups that come in as trash. And the reality is that they don't have the infrastructure to even recycle these cups, even though they are technically recyclable.
So you got a chance to go to that Starbucks lab. What are they doing to try to find solutions?
They got a couple of things that are going on that are interesting. The first one you may have noticed, you can actually bring your own cup into Starbucks. They put this like a little container out. You put it in. I did it this morning. You put your cup in the container. They take it back. They make your drink in it. They hand it back to you in the container. And so obviously no plastic is used there. That's not a lot of people are doing that. The other thing they've developed is a new plastic cup, a new number 5 plastic cup that has up to 20% less plastic in it. They say that's, I think, 18 million pounds less pounds of plastic that go into the landfill. But in the end, they're still using that number 5 plastic. And as I said before, that plastic is very difficult to recycle.
And we know that countries are trying to create a binding agreement to limit plastic production. Those talks, though, just broke down. No agreement. Why did they break down? What happened there, David?
Yeah, this was 100 nations around the world, like basically all the nations around the world were just at these talks in South Korea. 100 countries said, we want binding quotas on how much plastic can be manufactured on the planet. And just a very few states, countries, namely Saudi Arabia, said, no, we're not going to, we make this stuff. This is comes from oil, and this is what we do. We are not going to vote for any kind of binding resolution on production. What we're interested in is more recycling. Let's promote recycling. Let's talk about recycling, which really dovetails pretty nicely with the story, as we know that a lot of people just say recycling is a myth, and what we saw sort of reaffirms that.
All right, and where can we see your full report, David? I know it's an important conversation that so many people want to continue.
Yeah, CBSNews.com. Our story's up there right now, and we hope you can join us and join the conversation.
All right, David Schechter, CBS News national environmental correspondent. Last question, hot or iced on your latte?
I like a hot latte. Hot latte. Yeah.
All right, I'll take the iced, even when it's cold. David, nice to talk to you. In New York, closing arguments in the trial of a military veteran accused of killing a homeless man via a chokehold. Prosecutors say Daniel Penny just went too far, placing Jordan Neely in that fatal chokehold. Neely was reportedly acting erratically, and Penny's defense says he was trying to protect others. If found guilty, Daniel Penny faces 19 years behind bars. Jumping the map to San Francisco for closing arguments in the murder case of Nima Momeni. He is, of course, the man who is accused of stabbing to death tech executive Bob Lee, who founded Cash App. The defense argues Momeni acted in self-defense, accusing Lee of attacking him with a knife first. But prosecutors believe Momeni pulled out the blade and, in a grudge-filled act, plunged it into Bob Lee. Momeni pled not guilty to murder charges. Florida woman who murdered her boyfriend by stuffing him in a suitcase will learn her fate in a sentencing hearing today. Here's the backstory. In October, a jury found Sarah Boone guilty of second-degree murder connected to the death of Jorge Torres Jr. He died of asphyxiation inside that suitcase that was zipped up tight back in 2020. For that, Boone faces life in prison. We will be watching what happens in sentencing. Police in Oregon have arrested the husband of a missing Oregon hiker for murder. This as the search for that missing Oregon hiker comes to a tragic end. So over the weekend, searchers found Susan Lane Fournier's body dumped out there in the woods. Michael Fournier now faces second-degree murder charges. The search for his wife began after Susan failed to show up for work November 22nd. When we see it, you'll see it. Breaking news happening all the time on CBS News 24/7. Thank you for watching on a Monday.